The Clothes Have No Emperor. Written and narrated by Ian Purdy. Copyright 2025. Part 3. Yeshua's Message to the World. Translation. Everything we know or think we know about Yeshua, Jesus, comes to us via several translations. Translation is an art. No matter how objectively a translator attempts to approach his work, and they were all men, he cannot help but have some personal influence on the final result. That's why translations always differ slightly. It is unheard of for two translators to come up with exactly the same form of words and phrases for even the most rudimentary texts. It is unlikely that the early translators of Yeshua's words had access to a dictionary. The translations were the result of subjective knowledge of the languages they were dealing with, and we know absolutely nothing about their methodology. The translator's primary tool is his own mind, and he cannot help but bring his personal belief paradigm to the task. No matter how faithfully he may attempt to represent the truth and message conveyed by the words, he can only try to represent the original to the best of his personal ability, drawing on his own knowledge, experience, and beliefs. Few translations capture 100% of the intended meaning of somebody from another culture speaking another language in another era. Renowned biblical translator Mauro Biglino, in part 1 of The Falling of the Gods, states, I quote, "The translations have always changed and will continue to change. However, the Bible is always preached as true, absolutely true, on the basis of the translation of the moment. Since the translations change, the truth of the moment also changes." Unquote. Words are designations on a continuum of meaning, and different languages choose different places on that spectrum to place their words. This is especially true when dealing with complex philosophical, religious, and spiritual concepts. When discussing objects, a dog is always a dog. However, a large brown dog could describe a number of different breeds and types of dog. It can never definitively capture exactly which dog as accurately as a photo or video. I have 4 white cats, and the only tangible differences in describing them are their ages and sexes. I can easily tell which is which by sight, sound, and feel, but trying to describe the differences to somebody else, especially somebody who is blind or somebody who's never seen a cat, is simply not possible. Some words mean different things in different cultures and religions. Religionists often assume that another religion shares the same or at least similar terminology as their own. For example, heaven and nirvana don't have the same meaning. Conceptually, they are very different. Heaven and nirvana both exist in Buddhism as completely different things, but this difference is probably not as obvious to a Christian or a Muslim. Enlightenment has a different meaning to a Hindu, a Buddhist, or to a European. The term past lives means something different in cultures that accept the reality of reincarnation compared to those that don't. Reincarnation and rebirth are also not identical concepts. God means something different to a Hindu or to a Buddhist, a Christian, or a Muslim. The English language has no word that is equivalent to or can be translated directly as karma. We have similar concepts embodied in statements like, "What goes around comes around." Similarly, we have no equivalent words for sem or rigpa in Tibetan. These words refer to specific aspects of mind which Western psychology, due to scientific method, which insists everything be done objectively, has yet to comprehend and attempts to represent in a completely different way. There is also the process of transliteration, where a word in one language which has no corresponding word in another language is adapted to sound like it belongs in the other language. An example of this is the Greek word apostolos, which has no corresponding word in English, but which has been transliterated as the word apostle. Another factor influencing the outcome of a translation is the motivation of the translator. If they are translating to earn money to feed their family, they are more likely to favor the person who is paying them with any discretionary terminology. They are also more likely to favour and support whatever interests their benefactor has in the result of the translation. If they are translating believing that the outcome will affect their afterlife, as with religious texts, this cannot but affect the outcome of their endeavours. Magdelene states in part 2 of The Falling of the Gods, I quote, "Theology is forced to say something different from what the text says, where the text means other things. But if we don't even know who wrote it, how do we pretend to be in his head?" Unquote. One of my core contentions in this work is that the authors of the Bible, who wrote in Greek, mistook Yeshua's descriptions of mind for their preconceived notion that his idea of the divine and theirs were the same. They assumed he was talking about the God of the Jews. I do not make or agree with this assumption. Yeshua spoke in metaphors and parables, as do most great spiritual teachers. We simply don't have words which can describe many of the experiences in meditation. Tantra uses sexual imagery, which in itself has resulted in a lot of confusion and immense variations in actual meaning and lots of misunderstanding. The Buddhist tradition emphasizes the role of the guru to ensure that the student is developing a correct understanding. When the guru is not present, it is far easier for the student to become a victim of the many impediments to wisdom that arise on the spiritual path. This relationship is far more vital and personal than a believer's relationship with a pastor, priest, or imam. See Appendix 12, Mind. The most controversial words allegedly spoken by Yeshua in the Bible are God, Father, and Heaven. They are the basis and, I contend, the most misrepresented subjects of Yeshua's teaching. I reject the translations that have resulted in these words being construed as identical to the ancient Jewish scriptures enshrined in the Old Testament. Yeshua's message was rejected by the Jewish religious hierarchy because it was different. Yet it is presented in the Bible as an extension or an adjunct to these ancient beliefs. The term kingdom of heaven is more easily demonstrated to be something very different to what is presented in the Bible. This is dealt with extensively in Appendix 3, Heaven and Hell. I have used a number of translation sources for my quotations from the seminal Gospels of Philip and Thomas. Naturally, I chose translations which best suited my purpose, which was to demonstrate that Yeshua was not talking about the Jewish God as most other scholars of the Holy Bible assert. Instead, I approached it from a Buddhist perspective, which regards the divine as an aspect of mind and not as an external theistic entity. My primary translation sources for the seminal Gospels of Philip and Thomas are Stephen J. Patterson and James M. Robinson from the Gnostic Society Library, and Mark M. Mattison. Most of the quotations are annotated with scriptural references and others are not. This is due to the fact that these references are absent from some of the translations, and as already noted, I have drawn from a number of different translations. Contrary to the assertions in the Christian Bible, what is presented to us about the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth is far from being established dogma. Translation is just one of the many variables that was not only manipulated for political and religious purposes, but is also an imprecise, subjective undertaking which simply cannot match the accuracy of processes like photocopying or audio recording. Translations require interpretation, and that is what I have attempted to do. A final quote from Magdelene during a conversation with author Paul Wallace in Gods of the Bible. I quote, "We must not be dogmatic. It is necessary to be open to all possible solutions, but we must know that there are several possible solutions, not just one." The Gospel of Philip. The Nag Hammadi library was found in northern Egypt in 1945. It had been buried in clay jars for almost 2,000 years, and inside the jars was a collection of early Gnostic texts written on papyrus in Coptic, specifically the Sahidic dialect. They were not edited or interfered with by the Romans or anybody else and had been translated from an unknown original source which mainstream scholars speculate was Greek. There is no evidence to support this beyond Greek being the original language of the canonical Christian Gospels. They could just as credibly have been translated from Aramaic or Hebrew, the languages Yeshua and his followers spoke. The Nag Hammadi library is the closest thing to an original source that exists, other than the Talpiot tomb and its contents. Included amongst these treasures was the only surviving complete text of the Gospel of Philip. Yeshua adopted the name Philip as an alias when he fled from Israel after surviving his crucifixion. This enabled him to travel with his wife Mariamne, and posing as her brother Philip, he was able to continue his ministry as a missionary. If this assumption is correct, it follows that the Gospel of Philip was written by the Master Yeshua himself. This may be wild speculation, but we are dealing with 2,000-year-old subject matter, and the accepted sources have all been obviously corrupted and are inconsistent and contradictory. To quote a Christian, Dr. J. Smith of Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, quoting a Muslim he refers to as Raymond, who was quoting somebody called Dr. J. Madawi, I quote, "The absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence," unquote. Between them they made sense. The entire edifice of Christianity, with the exception of some of the writings of the Apostle Paul, rests on anonymous sources. The four Gospels of Matthew, whoever he was, Mark, never heard of him, Luke, who? And somebody they say was allegedly called John. The assertions contained in the Holy Bible are far more outrageous and ridiculous than anything I am proposing, yet an entire world religion is based solely on these spurious sources. The Gospel of Philip contains some passages which refer to Yeshua in the third person, which makes sense because writing under a pseudonym, he could not refer to any of his previous statements in any other way without blowing his cover. There is also one third-person reference to the Apostle Philip. I consider this to be Yeshua's way of hinting to astute scholars that he was not really Philip, and thereby inviting speculation as to his actual identity. I quote from the Gospel of Philip. "Philip the apostle said, 'Joseph the carpenter planted a garden, for he needed wood for his trade. He is the one who made the cross from the trees he planted, and his own offspring hung on what he planted. His offspring was Jesus, and what he planted was the cross.'" Unquote. The Gospel of Philip deals intimately with Mariamne in ways that are consistent with it being the work of her loving husband. There are quotes attesting to this in the chapter Mariamne Mara. Beyond that, it is a book of advanced spiritual philosophy, the work of a highly accomplished spiritual master. It is the most conclusively Buddhist text in the entire body of Christian literature, including all the Gospels and commentaries on the teachings of the Master Yeshua. One section speaks about spiritual growth. I quote, "The world is farmed through four things. They gather into barns through water, earth, air, and light. In the same way, God farms through four things too, through faith, hope, love, and knowledge. Faith is the earth in which we take root. Hope is the water with which we are nourished. Love is the air through which we grow. Knowledge is the light by which we ripen." Unquote. This contains nothing even vaguely Christian besides the mistranslation of the word God, but perfectly matches the imagery employed in the Lotus Sutra, which describes the processes through which enlightenment is attained. The Buddha used the analogy of the lotus flower, which germinates in earth, then grows up through water to emerge into the air where sunlight causes it to flower. The earth represents suffering and ignorance. The water symbolizes emotional purification and the need for a clear mind to rise above mundane existence. The air symbolizes liberation, freedom, space, and knowledge attained through mindfulness and meditation, where we respond to the light symbolizing divine wisdom to open to reveal our true, magnificent, enlightened nature. The Gospel of Philip also contains many obvious references to rebirth. I quote, "Blessed is the one who exists before existing, because they who exist now have already existed and they will exist again." Unquote. This is fairly self-explanatory. It has no other plausible meaning other than rebirth, and it contradicts the Christian doctrine of creation and judgment after one life. There's a lot more, and here's another example. I quote, Truth did not come into the world naked, but in symbols and images. The world cannot receive truth in any other way. There is rebirth and the image of rebirth, and it is by means of this image that one must be reborn. What image is this? It is resurrection. Image must arise through image. By means of this, the bridal chamber and the image must approach the truth. This is restoration." Unquote. The main mistranslation here is the word resurrection followed by restoration. These concepts are inconsistent with the rest of the passage, but are both obvious references to aspects of transformation. It also contains a reference to the bridal chamber, which I will examine in greater detail later in this chapter. Regarding ignorance as evil, I quote, "Ignorance is the mother of all evil. Ignorance leads to death because those who come from ignorance neither were, nor are, nor will be. But those in truth will be perfect when all truth is revealed. For truth is like ignorance. While hidden, truth rests in itself. But when revealed and recognized, truth is praised in that it is stronger than ignorance and error. It gives freedom. The word says, if you know the truth will make you free. Ignorance is a slave. Knowledge is freedom. If we know the truth, we shall find the fruit of truth within us. If we join with it, it will bring us fulfillment." Unquote. In Buddhism, the root cause of ignorance is belief in the self, or the entity that will die with the body. The self is the source of greed and selfishness and is impermanent, illusory, and an impediment to spiritual realization. For more on this, see Appendix 12, Mind. Becoming perfect is not a Christian concept. Christianity tells us that we are all sinners, imperfect vessels who rely on God's mercy to save us from our inherent wretchedness. The Gospel of Philip contains the recurring theme of becoming perfect during this life. I quote, "We must become perfect before we leave this world." Unquote. A Buddha is defined as a perfect human being, exhibiting the 32 greater and 68 lesser signs of physical perfection. Only a perfect body can support a perfect mind, and the mind is our only path to nirvana, the kingdom of heaven. See Appendix 3, Heaven and Hell. The Gospel of Philip states the following, I quote, "The perfect human can neither be grasped nor seen. What is seen can be grasped. No one can obtain this grace without putting on perfect light and becoming perfect light. Whoever puts on light will enter the place of rest. This is perfect light, and we must become perfect humans before we leave the world. Whoever obtains everything but does not separate from this world will not be able to attain that realm, but will go to the middle place, for that one is not perfect." Unquote. The image of the bridal chamber is the most prevalent, consistent theme in the Gospel of Philip. This is tantra. It is inside the bridal chamber that the sacred female, wisdom, is united with the sacred male, method, to attain enlightenment. This process does not refer to the physical body. In Tibetan, the bridal chamber is represented as Yab Yum. In depictions of Yab Yum, whether as statues or in art, people unfamiliar with tantra see two gods having sex. However, anybody familiar with Tantra recognizes the bridal chamber, the supramundane state where enlightenment occurs. I quote from the Gospel of Philip, "If anyone becomes a child of the bridal chamber, they will receive the light. If anyone doesn't receive it while they are here, they won't be able to receive it in the other place." Unquote. Yeshua and Mariamne embody this perfect union, but Christianity has worked tirelessly over many centuries to destroy their representation of this sacred totality. The reference to the other place is clearly a reference to the afterlife. It is not portrayed as either heaven or hell, and there is no implication of judgment or union with God. This corresponds with the Buddhist notions of the bardo of the afterlife and the bardo of becoming or rebirth. The Gospel of Philip states, I quote, "The Holy of Holies is the bridal chamber. The kingdom of heaven is the bridal chamber. Whoever is anointed has everything, the resurrection, the light, the cross, the Holy Spirit. The Father gave this to him in the bridal chamber, and he received it. The Father was in the Son, and the Son in the Father. This is the kingdom of heaven." Unquote. The bridal chamber is an aspect of mind, specifically individual depth consciousness, which the Tibetans call rigpa. It has nothing to do with the afterlife and can only be entered whilst still alive. The bridal chamber, or yab yum, is where enlightenment is attained. There are also 2 references to the bridal chamber in the Gospel of Thomas, which few scholars contest is a series of actual quotes from the Master Yeshua. This undeniable link is further compelling evidence that the Gospel of Philip was written by Yeshua himself. See Appendix 7, the Gospel of Thomas, for further clarification. The Orthodox Christian position regarding sexuality was perhaps best summed up by Pope Innocent III, 1160 to 1216, when he stated, I quote, "The sexual act is so shameful that it is intrinsically evil." Unquote. Another Christian theologian maintained, "The Holy Ghost is absent from the room shared by a wedded couple." It is little wonder that the early Christian church declared the Gospel of Philip to be heresy and did its best to erase it from the face of the earth. I quote again from the Gospel of Philip, "In this world where strength and weakness are to be found, there is union of male and female, but in the eternal realm there is a different kind of union. Although we refer to these things with the same words, there are also other words that are superior to every word that is pronounced." Unquote. The recurring theme of the bridal chamber as the highest spiritual achievement or mystical experience, the end of the journey, cannot mean anything other than the union of the sacred male with the sacred female, or yab yum. This is also the core principle in all Buddhist tantras, which use sexual imagery to describe this highly esoteric process. On the physical plane, it is through the method of the male that conception is achieved, and then through the wisdom of the female that the child is produced. It is also through this sacred combination of wisdom female and method male that enlightenment is attained. Yeshua and Mariamne together represent this eternal potential that is latent within all of us. These passages have mystified Christians, but to a Buddhist, they are the clearest, most relevant texts in the entire Christian canon. I quote, "When Eve was in Adam, there was no death. When she separated from him, death came. If she enters into him again and he embraces her, death will cease to be." Unquote. Another quote, "If the female had not separated from the male, the female and the male would not have died. The separation of male and female was the beginning of death. Christ came to heal the separation that was from the beginning and reunite the two in order to give life to those who died through separation and unite them. The woman is united with her husband in the bridal chamber, and those united in the bridal chamber will not be separated again. That is why Eve became separated from Adam, because she had not united with him in the bridal chamber." Unquote. In the Gospel of Philip, the body is described as something dirty and evil, a prison from which we must escape. This is also a major theme in the Gospel of Thomas. Therefore, the sacred union attained in the bridal chamber cannot possibly be construed as physical. I quote from the Gospel of Philip, "No one would hide something valuable and precious in a valuable container, but countless sums are commonly kept in a container worth only a cent. So it is with the soul. It is something precious that has come to be in a worthless body." Unquote. I quote again, "If the person despises the body and considers it a laughing matter, the person will come out laughing." Unquote. Another. I quote, "When Abraham was able to see what he was to see, he circumcised the flesh of the foreskin, thus teaching us that it is necessary to destroy the flesh." Unquote. This theme is one of the foundations of Buddhist philosophy and practice and forms the basis of the concept of liberation. According to the Four Noble Truths, everything, including the body, is impermanent and a cause of suffering. The body is considered to be empty of inherent existence, or sunyata, being merely a dependent arising, the result of worldly causes. The Tibetans have a custom known as sky burial, where a freshly deceased corpse is hacked into small pieces and fed to the wild vultures. According to the Gospel of Philip, and I quote, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they are alive, when they die, they will not receive anything." Unquote. Superficially, this can be misconstrued to support the evangelical belief that faith must be attained in this life and those who receive it are born again. Unfortunately for them, receiving ignorance in this life can only grant temporary entry into the kingdom of heaven based solely on the illusion of ego and will ultimately fall away. Ignorance, no matter how eloquently presented, is death. This resurrection must be grounded in wisdom, otherwise it is an illusion and an impediment to genuine spiritual progress. This assumption is also contradicted by the passages quoted above that clearly refer to rebirth. A further passage, I quote from the Gospel of Philip. "It is good to leave the world before one sins. Some have neither the will nor the strength to act. Others, even if they have the will, do themselves no good, for they have not acted. And if they do not have the will, righteousness is beyond their grasp in either case. It always comes down to the will, not the action." Unquote. A further quote. I quote, "The upper realm was opened for us in the lower realm, that we might enter the hidden realm of truth. This is what is truly worthy and mighty, and we shall enter through symbols that are weak and insignificant. They are weak compared to perfect glory. There is glory that surpasses glory. There is power that surpasses power. Perfect things have opened to us and hidden the things of truth. The Holy of Holies was revealed and the bedchamber invited us in." Unquote. A further quote. "If someone becomes an attendant of the bridal chamber, that person will receive the light. If one does not receive it while here in this place, one cannot receive it in the other place. Those who receive the light cannot be seen or grasped. Nothing can trouble such people, even while they are living in this world. And when they leave this world, they have already received truth through images, and the world has become the eternal realm. To these people, the eternal realm has become fullness. This is the way it is. It is revealed to such a person alone, hidden not in darkness and night, but hidden in perfect day and holy light." Unquote. This passage contains another reference to the other place, which is clearly differentiated from the eternal realm that can only be realized in the bridal chamber during life. The eternal realm is described as fullness and is obviously a state beyond death, as opposed to the other place, where those who have not united the male with the female in the bridal chamber of their enlightened mind must return to between lives. It is also interesting to note that the eternal realm is not specifically equated with the kingdom of heaven. A translation either by or in the presence of somebody familiar with Buddhist tantra would yield far deeper revelations from this astounding document. In this context, enlightenment can be considered a form of virgin birth. The idea of a child being born without its parents having sexual intercourse is absurd. However, enlightenment, often translated as resurrection in texts from the Nag Hammadi library, is the result of the union of the sacred female and the sacred male in the bridal chamber, or yab yum. The enlightened consciousness emerges in a form of virgin birth from this sacred union, which has nothing to do with physical copulation. This process is entirely spiritual. While the exact term meditate does not appear in many translations of the Gospel of Philip, in the translation of Mark M. Madison, for example, it appears once, there are equivalent phrases and concepts that convey a similar idea. For example, the text mentions contemplation in several places, emphasizing the importance of introspection and spiritual reflection. The Gospel of Philip also uses phrases like to seek oneself and to know oneself, which imply an introspective and contemplative approach. These concepts and phrases suggest that the Gospel of Philip values inner reflection, self-awareness, and contemplation as essential aspects of spiritual growth and enlightenment. The following from the Gospel of Philip can be nothing other than instructions on meditation. Just because translators were unable to understand this to mean exactly what it says, doesn't mean it means some other unspecified thing. The words pray and Father are obvious mistranslations, but otherwise the meaning is clear. I quote, "Go into your room, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father who is in secret. That is the one who is innermost. What is innermost is the fullness, and there is nothing further within. This is what they call the uppermost." Unquote. This is in direct conflict with Christianity, which stresses prayer and confession exclusively outward appellations to an external deity. There's more. I quote, "The rulers wanted to fool people since they saw that people have a kinship to what is truly good. They took the names of the good and assigned them to what is not good to fool people with names and link the names to what is not good. So as if they are doing people a favor, they take names from what is not good and transfer them to the good in their own way of thinking. For they wish to take free people and enslave them forever." Unquote. This is original, prescient, startling wisdom. The Gospel of Philip is the real Bible, and the real Bible is tantra. It is the inspired fruit of actual realization, and these are the words of a genuine enlightened master. They elaborate on and add to Yeshua's essential Buddhist message using new metaphors and allegories. If the Gospel of Thomas can be considered a spiritual goldmine, the Gospel of Philip is Fort Knox. Philip was a nobody in the Bible. If he existed at all, he would have been one of the people in the dark room who still couldn't see when the light was turned on. There is nothing that suggests that he was capable of writing anything as extraordinary as this gospel attributed to his name. Yeshua was not illiterate, and it makes sense that in his latter years he would have written down his realizations in order to clarify any misunderstandings that had arisen and to preserve his wisdom for the benefit of future generations. The pseudonym Philip was the perfect vehicle for this incredible undertaking, indelibly linking it to Yeshua without betraying his status as one of the rare survivors of crucifixion. Many of the early Christians would have understood its source and therefore its significance. The Gospel of Philip is a series of stunning revelations that need to be taken extremely seriously. They may contain the key to humanity's future. In summary, the Gospel of Philip clearly states the following key Buddhist tantric principles. We are reborn into many lives. It is only during life that we can unite the sacred male with the sacred female, yab yum, in the bridal chamber of our mind. We do this through meditation where we become familiar with our depth consciousness, and it is here that we experience the kingdom of heaven, and through this realization we attain eternal life. The surface part of mind, sem, self, dies with the body. So unless we can unite the two parts of our individual consciousness, sem and rigpa, through method and wisdom in this life, our self will also perish. The Gospel of Philip is conclusive proof that a tantric master traveled from India to Israel. Tantra is unique and is only practiced in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and ancient Tibetan Bon. There is no corresponding doctrine anywhere else in the world, and there was nothing even vaguely similar in any part of the Roman Empire in the 1st century. The idea that a Gnostic master dreamed it or channeled it or received it in some other esoteric form of transmission is laughable. This is simply not how Tantra works. It relies exclusively on the process of initiation from master to student. Its clear enunciation in the Gospels of Philip and Thomas from the Nag Hammadi library is so anomalous it constitutes a cataclysm to the accepted doctrines of Christianity, Judaism, Hellenistic philosophy, and everything else that is considered foundational to orthodox Western thought. Philip's connection to Yeshua is undeniable. Philip is mentioned in all 4 canonical Gospels as one of the 12 disciples, which begs the question, was Mariamne disciple number 13, or was she replaced by the alias Philip? Modern scholarship cannot credibly deny that Mariamne was one of the disciples before she became Yeshua's wife. The Gnostics, who hid and stored these precious artifacts in clay jars, were a known sect of early Christians. The Gospel of Philip is supported by the Gospel of Thomas, which consists of 114 direct quotes attributed to the Master Yeshua. These are obvious adjuncts to the Book of Philip, and the link between these two works is stark and significant. No credible historian has been able to refute that Judah, Yeshua's son, was the source of the Gospel of Thomas, the second treasure chest of tantric wisdom. The evidence from Hemis Monastery, which documented Yeshua's travels to India and his Hindu and Buddhist studies, is compelling. No aspect of Buddhism tolerates deceit. It is antithetical to the entire doctrine, and any suggestion that the dedicated Buddhist monks at Hemis Monastery would preserve and venerate a fraudulent document is simply not credible to anybody familiar with the teachings of Buddha. The fact that it remains hidden from the public also supports its authenticity. It has only been revealed to a few specific people and is definitely not a tourist attraction. It remains concealed within the library of Hemis Monastery's accepted sacred texts. The only other record of an Indian ascetic travelling to Europe at this time was Zermanichegus around 20 BC. He was part of an Indian embassy, and he promptly performed a public act of self-immolation when he reached Athens, Greece, where his tomb can still be found. The first record of a Buddhist monk travelling to Europe was Anagarika Dharmapala, who travelled from Sri Lanka in 1893, almost 2,000 years later. Tantra was not a viable religious influence in first century Israel. The idea that anybody other than Yeshua was capable of writing the Gospel of Philip is like claiming Shakespeare didn't write Macbeth, but that his unknown random neighbour down the road wrote it. Here are some more examples of the profound tantric wisdom found in the Gospel of Philip. I quote, "Bridegrooms and brides belong to the bridal chamber. No one can see a bridegroom or a bride except by becoming one." Unquote. As a practitioner of Buddhist Tantra, I spend several hours every week inside the bridal chamber, attempting to unite the sacred female wisdom with the sacred male method. I do this through the meditation techniques prescribed by highest Buddhist Tantra, the Kalachakra. In the Gospels of Philip and Thomas, I recognize somebody who has realized the totality of this sacred process. I can see the bridegroom. A further quote, "At present, we encounter the visible things of creation, and we say that they are mighty and worthy, and the hidden things are weak and insignificant. It is not so with the visible things of truth. They are weak and insignificant, but the hidden things are mighty and worthy." Unquote. If you love Jesus, you must read the Gospel of Philip. Decoding the Bible. According to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I quote, "Spiritual means the mind. Spiritual people are those who seek its nature." Unquote. Yeshua clearly understood this when he stated in saying 70 in the Gospel of Thomas, I quote, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Unquote. If saying 70 is applied to the words attributed to Jesus in the Bible, an entirely different interpretation of his teachings emerges. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, states in her seminal book, The Secret Doctrine, I quote, "The kingdom of God is within. Awaken it and you awaken the world." Unquote. Christianity has stripped the sacred female from its doctrine, called her a whore, and flushed her significance and contribution down the toilet. It denies wisdom and focuses exclusively on method, groveling before God, confessing sins, and going to church to be told what to think and how to act. I am reclaiming the Master Yeshua's words as the sacred property of humanity. Translation, transliteration, and Roman politics have provided us with a male-centric, anti-female, vague, limited meaning, a lot of which borders on absurdity. In the light of accepted timeless spiritual principles, I am attempting to resurrect the original intended meaning. By this I aspire to redirect greater scholars' minds in a more relevant, fruitful direction. The Gospel of Philip states, I quote, "The names of worldly things are utterly deceptive, for they turn the heart from what is real to what is unreal. Whoever hears the word God thinks not of what is real, but rather of what is unreal. So also the words Father, Son, Holy Spirit, life, resurrection, church, and all the rest. People do not think of what is real, but of what is unreal, though the words refer to what is real. The words that are heard belong to this world. Do not be deceived. If words belong to the eternal realm, they would never be pronounced in this world, nor would they designate worldly things. They would refer to what is in the eternal realm." Unquote. In the Bible, Jesus spoke of God the Father. God and Father are considered to be the same entity in the Bible, but this is an inaccurate simplification and mistranslation of Yeshua's spiritual message. The word God is completely absent from many translations of the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas. For more information and examples of these discrepancies, see Appendix 7, the Gospel of Thomas. If we examine the words God and Father separately, they are two distinct concepts which refer to specific different aspects of our spiritual reality. God is generally understood to be the creator of the world and everything in it. This equates to the Jewish deity Jehovah or Yahweh in the Old Testament, or the Elohim in the original Hebrew. See Appendix 1, God. Muslims call him Allah. In Buddhist terms, it coincides with the ground luminosity, the plenum void, or the underlying source of all that is. The word luminosity has also been translated to mean knowingness. Buddhists use this terminology to describe the most fundamental level of mind, sometimes referred to as universal consciousness, which is analogous with the quantum field in modern physics. Father is a more intimate term, and Yeshua is quoted making some very specific references to the Father, notably in the Gospel of John. For example, I quote, "The Father and I are one. The Father is in me, and I am in the Father." Unquote. In the Bible, these statements were considered blasphemy by the Jewish Pharisees, and Jesus was nearly stoned to death for daring to utter them. They misinterpreted these words to mean that Jesus was claiming to be God, but this is not what Yeshua meant. When Yeshua spoke of the Father, it was associated with the promise of eternal life, which, based on the above quotations, can only be a reference to the part of a person that doesn't die, or what Christians understand to be the soul. The term Father represents the Christianization of what Yeshua refers to as the bridal chamber in both the Gospels of Philip and Thomas. Christianity, in its desperation to remove the female wisdom principle from its doctrine, not only eliminated any echo of the feminine, but totally masculinized it, using the word father, which is as utterly devoid of any female characteristics as language will allow. Saying 15 in the Gospel of Thomas states, I quote, "When you see the one who wasn't born of a woman, fall down on your face and worship that person. That's your father." Unquote. This is not a negation of the female and therefore cannot be interpreted as a reference to physical birth, which cannot happen without a woman. It is referring to another type of birth, sometimes translated as resurrection, and refers to the birth of an enlightened consciousness which is only possible within the bridal chamber. From a Buddhist perspective, the father equates to what the Tibetans call rigpa, or individual depth consciousness, which modern psychology has mislabeled the subconscious mind. It is a level of consciousness that without cultivation we are not naturally aware of. The Gospel of Philip instructs, I quote, "Go into your room, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father who is in secret. That is the one who is innermost. What is innermost is the fullness, and there is nothing further within." Unquote. The I, Sem in Tibetan, is awareness moving forward through time, which is what we consider to be our self. To illustrate the illusory nature of the I or Sem that we imagine ourselves to be and its relationship to Father or Rigpa in Tibetan, consider a situation where you are driving a car while chatting with your passenger. None of that conversation is actually real in the cosmic scheme of things, but it will be your prominent memory, barring something unforeseeable like a car accident. Maybe you discussed some members of the opposite sex or your favourite sports team, or just the weather. You might have made plans or ploughed over some shared memories, but the only real consequential thing that happened was that you travelled from A to B. That was accomplished by the part of your mind that you have no real knowledge of and were not consciously aware of during the journey. In reality, that is the real you, Rigpa. It is what Yeshua was referring to as Father in the Bible or the bridal chamber in the Gospels of Philip and Thomas. This more subtle level of consciousness, Rigpa, conditions and controls our surface mind, Sem. It predicates who and what we are. In saying 84 from the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua states, I quote, "When you see your likeness, you rejoice, but when you see your images that came into being before you did, which won't die and aren't revealed, how much you will have to bear." Unquote. Jesus is quoted in the Gospel of John as having told his disciples, "I am in my Father, and you are in me, just as I am in you." Unquote. None of this makes any sense from a Christian perspective, but if it is considered in the context of mind, the message begins to clarify. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the Guru explaining that we are all connected at the level of depth consciousness, known as Rigpa, and we can all access this level of mind through meditation. This is the eternal part of every human being, existing beyond individuality, time and space. Author and meditator Cynthia Sue Larson describes this deeper experience of meditation in the following way, I quote, "We sometimes get a feeling that we are so much more connected, that in a very real sense we are sharing the same dream. I recognize that in some ways I am playing a role, but who I am is so much bigger, so much more mysterious. It's eternal, it's infinite, it's timeless, it's connected to everything. It's our consciousness that creates all of this. When we get there, that is oneness." Unquote. Most people will recognize this as a description of the kingdom of heaven that Yeshua constantly alluded to. Saying 75 from the Gospel of Thomas states, I quote, "There are many who are standing at the door, but it is the solitaries who will enter the bridal chamber." Unquote. To use the analogy of a modern computer, the I, Sem, is the picture on the screen that jumps from program to program and is all colours and sound. It's fun to be you, unless you get kicked off Facebook or somebody posts an unflattering picture on Instagram. This is what you think you are. It's your surface consciousness. This is the part of mind that 90% of modern psychology has yet to transcend, the ego, the id, and all of the other superficial Freudian terminology. They rarely get to the deeper levels. It can be said that in the Christian Trinity, Sem equates with the Son. But behind your personality or self, Sem, maintaining it all and making it possible are the invisible guts of your computer where all the programs live, or in terms of you, a human being, this equates to Rigpa, or the subconscious mind that drives the car while you talk with your friend or folds the washing as you watch TV. This is what Yeshua was referring to as Father. Staying with the analogy of a computer, next we have the internet, which equates to universal consciousness or the ground luminosity or just plain old God. The workings of this mysterious force are light years away from your surface consciousness, Sem, but are your essence and have a profound influence on your thoughts, speech, and behavior. Alan Watts describes it in the following way, I quote, "You can begin to feel your own existence as absolutely fundamental. What you are basically deep, deep down, far, far in is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself." Unquote. So to make it simpler, Jesus, Son, Sem, is the picture on the screen, the Father, Rigpa, bridal chamber, is the computer's hard drive, motherboard, programs, and all the rest of that stuff, and the internet is God, or the ground luminosity, or ground knowingness, or in Christian terminology, this could be a more accurate description of the Holy Spirit. In saying 48 in the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua states, I quote, "If two make peace with each other in a single house, they'll say to the mountain, 'Go away,' and it will." Unquote. In saying 107, I quote, "When you make the two into one, you'll become children of humanity, and if you say, 'Mountain, go away,' it will." Unquote. If these sayings are applied to mind, it becomes very clear that the path to the kingdom of heaven is through uniting surface consciousness, sem, with the subconscious or superconscious, rigpa. We do this by uniting the sacred female, wisdom, with the sacred male, method, in the bridal chamber through meditation. When this is done, you have access to the kingdom of heaven. This is the consistent core message that makes loving thy neighbor and thy enemy suddenly make sense, beyond just being an incongruous, naive suggestion that isn't going to get you into heaven anyway if you're a Christian. The purpose of Yeshua's teaching was not to get everybody down on their knees groveling to some imaginary Superman in the sky and bringing their children to church so the priest could fiddle with them. It was to help us realize our true nature, connecting us with the fundamental reality that we unknowingly embody. This reality is only accessible through training our mind to be able to recognize and interact with it intelligently and purposefully. In short, to become enlightened, which coincidentally just also happens to be the essential core teaching of Buddhism, Hinduism, Theosophy, and even Scientology. This is not about one religion being better than another or my God is bigger than yours. This is about the assertion that they are all really the same. Yeshua's message is spiritual truth, something that is central to all of our lives, whether we like it or not. And spiritual truth is absolute truth, which means it's consistent everywhere all the time. Buddha manifested about 500 years before Yeshua, and during his years in India, Yeshua studied the Buddhist teachings. But before him, Buddha learnt from the Hindu teachings which existed before he did. Neither Buddha nor Yeshua invented rebirth and karma. They simply recognized the truth and both wanted to express these absolute truths in a way that was acceptable within their culture and traditions. The main difference is that Buddha's message wasn't edited and corrupted by anybody as lead-poisoned and ignorant as the Romans. Consequently, it has survived virtually intact despite centuries of reinterpretation, mistranslations, and different cultures attempting to unleash their ignorance upon it. Buddhism was eventually corrupted by the Chinese who, similar to the Romans, saw it as a means of political domination. The only thing that saved Buddha's message was that it had already been preserved in many other cultures before the Chinese tried to use it to further their worldly ambitions, and they weren't able to eliminate all of the alternatives as the Romans did. There is only one ultimate spiritual truth, and that is my only interest in writing this. The Roman and Jewish notion that God and the Father are one and the same, and that they exist outside of and separate from human beings, is not contained anywhere within Yeshua's words. But this is what Christianity insists its adherents believe as the most important criteria, the only thing that guarantees salvation from burning in hell forever. As already stated, Yeshua's teachings were originally considered blasphemy and ultimately got him nailed up on the cross. Everyone in the modern world, except some scientists who claim they don't care, is afraid of death. We try to ignore this ultimate reality, relying on the continuity of self, which is our primary experience, since our self's creation during our childhood. We try to believe that our experienced continuity of self will continue, even though we know it had a beginning and therefore, logically, it will have an end. Our self is the single most important aspect of our modern reality, so we think that if anything can possibly save us and survive, it must be it. This is incorrect. Our self is an illusion. It is our awareness, which we call I, which is conditioned by our genetics, our family, the beliefs and customs of our culture, and the fact that what we call reality appears to take us seriously. We have a name, an address, a vocation, a set of characteristics, and the same reflection in every mirror which we recognize as ourself. We have a family and friends responding to us, describing and reinforcing to us the reality that we embody to them. But all of that will disappear, just like every ancient civilization that this planet has ever hosted. Nothing in our world is permanent. Nothing. It's horribly obvious that we die. That is why it is so vital that we discover within ourselves a deeper level than self. While we continue to identify with this illusion, we are even more temporary than it is. We change every minute, sometimes within seconds. There are two options. Look outside of yourself for some savior to show mercy on your wretched self, or find the Father within. The savior outside is subject to the conditions imposed on it by this world. The idea of a great, wonderful, loving God who can liberate your spirit from your dead body is a very appealing notion. It means you only have to believe what the Bible tells you and you'll be okay. The God within is a far more difficult proposition. If God is already inside, then what's the point of me? Why aren't I just God and create whatever I want and live forever? The God within requires a lot more than just going to church and regularly issuing vain, selfish prayers. It requires that you become acquainted with what you really are. This task is not necessarily the work of one lifetime. To become acquainted with mind requires a lot of effort over a long period of time. It's not like opening a Christmas present. First, you have to get over you. You are the keeper of your own gate, and you are that gate. While you are vigilant and strong, confident and powerful, nothing gets through the gate. You know what you know, and you are who you are, except it's all an illusion. You are far more than who you are and what you know. You have to get over all that just to get on the board so the real game can start. Yourself is the only obstacle that you must first overcome to get on the only path that leads to anywhere that isn't just more of your or whoever you believed in's ignorance. You don't have to go anywhere or learn anything. You actually have to discard most of what you think you know and believe and hold as sacred. You have to get beyond you. So how do you do that? You meditate. Your mind is the key, and the path to the kingdom of heaven is right there in your own temple, in your own head. No external God can help you with this. That is just a fantasy that keeps you imagining that you are a good person and worthy of God's pity in your pathetic state. This is what Christians, Muslims, and all the other God-fearing believers have been indoctrinated to gratefully accept. A blatant example of how Yeshua's words were altered in translation occurs in the Gospel of John. There is an enormous difference between the statement, "I am a son of God," as it appears in the original Greek, and "I am the Son of God," which is how it appears in the King James Bible. In the King James Bible, the is in italics and has the effect of appearing to emphasize what can only be accurately described as a typographical error or mistranslation. It is the difference between a simple statement of fact that any male who believes in God or is aware of universal consciousness could logically make, as opposed to being a claim of divinity. It was very significant in the context in which these words appear in the Bible, because if Yeshua really had said, "I am the Son of God," the faithful would have stoned him to death for blasphemy. Yet that is what Christians read and believe to be his actual words, and it is tragically misleading. This was further misinterpreted by the Nicene Creed to mean Jesus claimed, "I am God," which is preposterous, but that is the official Christian position to this day. This is ignorance. According to the Gospel of Philip, I quote, "In this world where strength and weakness are found, there is union of male and female, but in the eternal realm there is a different kind of union. Although we refer to these things with the same words, there are also other words that are superior to every word that is pronounced. These are above strength, and there are those superior to strength, and they are not different but the same. This is incomprehensible to hearts of flesh." Unquote. Trying to construct a viable intellect on concepts that are simply not rational is not possible. If somebody's fundamental beliefs are illogical because they were rammed into their mind when they were little children and they were brought up to believe that questioning them would land them in hell for eternity, whatever follows cannot be sound. A mind built on intellectual sand cannot be strong or rational. When you die, it will wash away. Virtue. The Buddha said, I quote, "Happiness follows the virtuous like a shadow that never departs." Unquote. Morality and ethics are the two subcomponents of virtue. They are modes of behavior which require a lot of personal discipline. Morality is how you relate to your inner world, and ethics are how you relate to the outer world. Once you begin to correctly relate to your inner world, you will realize that they are actually the same. If you behave virtuously, you will be considered civilized and will create harmony in your world. If you are immoral and unethical, you will be a savage and will create problems for yourself and everyone unfortunate enough to have to deal with you. These virtues have a similar effect on the inner world. A moral, ethical person tends to have a calm mind, whereas immoral, unethical people have minds full of afflictive emotions and turmoil. The basis of morality is, "Let he who is free from sin cast the first stone." Obviously, if you are a moral person, you won't be casting any stones. This means that until you have your own mind in order and under your disciplined control, you cannot judge anybody or anything else and should refrain from taking action against them. Otherwise, you will continue to create bad karma or action that will return to you in a negative form. The basis of ethics is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is a recipe for creating positive outcomes in your life, or good karma. It is very straightforward and tells us that we should consider the rights and well-being of others as being equally important to our own. A lot of Christians believe that without having faith that God is watching us, we have no sound basis for being virtuous. They believe that the only reason people behave virtuously is because God likes that, and they will be less likely to go to hell. This is absurd and is a product of ignorance. In this life, there are only three things that a human being can control. They are speech, body, and mind. Everything else relies on some degree of control over these three things. If you can wrest control of your speech, body, and mind away from the random thrust of action-reaction, then you will be able to control everything else to the same degree that you can control these three aspects of yourself. This is why ethics and morality are so important. The first thing you must learn is to control your speech. This means stop telling lies, stop using intemperate language, and refrain from frivolous chatter, gossip, and the like. This is not easy. It requires a lot of discipline and demands you take over God's role and police yourself moment to moment. It means you start using mind to do something for you rather than continuing to charge blindly forward like some mad pirate into the perpetual storm. When you take control of your body and your behavior, you cannot steal or kill or hurt any other creatures, and you must only ever do exactly what you say you will do with no remainder. This is even more difficult and requires an iron-willed approach to virtuous behavior to keep the mind unsullied by unreality. When you've got this working for you, you will already have taken major steps towards tackling the big one, gaining control over mind. Without having your speech and body under your dominion, mind will remain beyond your control. It will continue to bounce around the universe like a lost monkey, leaping from thought to sensation and back to thought, all the while having to deal with the emotions this random process continually throws up. The degree to which you can control mind is a direct reflection of your level of spiritual development. Morality and ethics are skillful modes of behavior, thought, and speech, and without them, spiritual progress is impossible. In saying 67 from the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua stated, I quote, "Whoever knows everything but is personally lacking lacks everything, unquote. If you practice meditation and behave virtuously, you don't have to believe in anything. This will create knowledge and you will know. This is how people eventually become real. If you are lying and stealing, you are part of the universe of deceit where nothing is real. Your mind will never have clarity and you will spend your time compensating for your inadequacies, which will form the basis of your fake personality or self. The Gospel of Philip states, I quote, "Whoever knows the truth is free, and a free person does not sin, for one who sins is a slave of sin. Truth is the mother, knowledge is the father. Those who do not allow themselves to sin, the world calls free. They do not allow themselves to sin, and knowledge of the truth lifts them up. That is, it makes them free and superior to all. But love builds up. Whoever is free through knowledge is a slave because of love for those who do not yet have freedom of knowledge. Knowledge enables them to be free. Love never says it owns something, though it owns everything. Love does not say this is mine or that is mine, but rather all that is mine is yours." Unquote. Once you take control, you will be free. Your words will have power because you won't be telling lies, and therefore you will speak truth. If you say something, it will happen. Your behavior will be wholesome and beneficial, and you will be considered reliable and trustworthy, which will lead to more benefits for you and others. This is what is meant when we talk about a real person, somebody who isn't fake and therefore isn't a potential source of deceit and trouble. Religion is an immensely important part of life and has unparalleled transformative potential if it is rooted in reason, best practice, and wisdom. This means its foundations must be morality and ethics, otherwise it's worthless. People with little or no virtue believe that nobody else has any virtue either, and that the whole subject is just another form of crowd control to keep the gullible in line. If you can't find a justification for honesty and integrity within your own heart, how can you imagine that anybody else can? Liars think everyone is a liar. Thieves think everyone is a thief. And murderers think everyone is a murderer. These people live in a world full of liars, thieves, and murderers, devoid of ethics and morality, and are eventually identified and shunned by the virtuous. By their speech and actions, they demonstrate that they cannot be trusted or relied upon. They are always the weak link. It's a sad paradox that Christians believe that without faith and ignorance, you can never be virtuous. Christianity will feed you a dull phantasmagoria of garbled drivel while yet another life slips away. Yeshua and his teachings need to be rehabilitated into the world's genuine spiritual traditions where his inspirational message can stop being the front for an immoral, unethical, global pedophile ring. I suggest you find any book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and read it. If you're ready to get on the path of genuine spiritual advancement, the path will manifest in front of you. It only requires your effort. Yeshua said, "Seek, and ye shall find." Wisdom. The concept of wisdom was light years beyond the lead-poisoned, low IQ Romans, who probably thought it was just another ancient myth, a symptom of the weakness of some of the civilizations they'd easily ploughed into the dust. They didn't choose Yeshua because they understood or believed a single word he'd uttered. Paul was responsible for the first wave of dumbing down the Master's message so it would be acceptable to Rome and slide easily into the minds of people with no alternatives and no choice. Once again, I turn to the timeless wisdom expressed so eloquently by Alan Watts. I quote, "A psychologist asked a patient, 'With whom are you in love against?' Many people are aware that this egocentric consciousness is an hallucination, and they presume it's the function of religion to change it, because that's what the Zen Buddhists and all the yogis are doing. They're changing their state of consciousness to get something called satori, or mystical experience, or nirvana, or moksha. You don't get that in church. There have been Christian mystics, but the church has been very quiet about them. In the average church, all you get is talk. There's no meditation, no spiritual discipline, and they tell God what to do as if he didn't know. And then they tell the people what to do as if they even could or wanted to. And then they sing religious nursery rhymes." Unquote. Christian religious services have absolutely nothing to do with mind. The early Roman services were in Latin, the original Roman language, so nobody, not even the priest, could understand a single word of what was being parroted at them. They had no interest in giving anybody anything to think about. Yeshua never said anything like, "Believe this or you'll be punished for eternity in hell." That's only consistent with the Romans wanting to keep people in fear and servitude. It isn't a credible spiritual message, it's crowd control. Yeshua did not preach crowd control. Instead, in the Bible, Yeshua said, I quote, "If somebody strikes you, turn the other cheek. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love thy enemy." Unquote. This is wisdom. These are expressions of the law of karma. Do good and good will return to you. Do evil and evil will return to you. Ignorance begets ignorance. Wisdom begets wisdom. Physics tells us that for every action, there is a reaction. The law of karma is central to all Eastern religions, from the Jains to the Buddhists, the Hindus, and the Sikhs. They all understand this central enlightened principle. It even exists in Judaism, despite being chronically misinterpreted. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth explains how karma works. It is not an invocation to commit atrocities against those who commit atrocities against you, as it has been understood or misunderstood for centuries by misguided people. It is ancient wisdom and is a classic example of how advanced spiritual knowledge can be misinterpreted and corrupted by ignorance. Karma is explained on helenablavatsky.org. I quote, "We consider it as the ultimate law of the universe, the source, origin, and fount of all other laws which exist throughout nature. Karma is the unerring law which adjusts effects to cause on the physical, mental, and spiritual planes of being. As no cause remains without its due effect, from the greatest to the least, from a cosmic disturbance down to the movement of your hand, and as like produces like, karma is that unseen and unknown law which adjusts wisely, intelligently, and equitably each effect to its cause, tracing the latter back to its producer. Though itself unknowable, its action is perceivable." Unquote. Karma doesn't make sense and can't exist without rebirth, and rebirth doesn't make sense and can't exist without karma. Similarly, up doesn't make sense and can't exist without down. Night doesn't make sense and can't exist without day, and good doesn't make sense and can't exist without bad. They are dependent on and condition each other like the two sides of your hand. Otherwise, how can a child be born in a war zone where it witnesses the deaths of the people it loves and depends on before itself being killed in an act of random barbarity? Or the victim of an abusive stepfather, beaten and deprived, then brutally murdered before it is old enough to have any dominion over its own life? If the Christian contention that God created these children for a short life of unspeakable suffering is correct, then God must be cruel and sadistic. Similarly, how can somebody like the Buddha, for example, be born in a palace and have every worldly pleasure at his slightest whim, then live a long, happy life of wealth and privilege? The idea that a person is created to live one life upon which they are judged by a creator who controls all of the variables and options during that life is an affront to any notion of justice and is completely unreasonable. Creation is a fine theory for ordinary people who live ordinary lives, but it cannot universally explain all the variables and extremes of life on earth. What about people who are never exposed to Christianity? How can they be expected to have faith in a doctrine that they've never heard of? What about virtuous Hindus or atheists? Condemning somebody to an eternity of suffering in hell because they failed to have faith in something they never encountered in their one life is absurd. Rebirth and karma are a far more rational explanation for the enormous range of possibilities which constitute our combined reality. Otherwise, life itself is the result of the whims of a capricious God who favors some of his creations over others for no particular reason. Believing that can only lead to despair and insanity. It is not a satisfactory spiritual solution to the conundrum we call life. It is worth repeating the words of Yeshua recorded in the Gospel of Philip. I quote, "Blessed is the one who exists before existing, because they who exist now have already existed and they will exist again." Unquote. Dying and then going to heaven or hell is a very limited acknowledgement of reincarnation. Christianity doesn't claim we are reborn in these realms, and they are very vague about what exactly goes there. Our soul? What's that? And why is it ours? If it can be acknowledged that we have two lives, then why not more? The reality of one life is in itself improbable, but we accept it based on the fact that we're alive now. So why not multiple lives? Why are 5 lives or 1,000 lives any less probable than one? We normally accept that if we can do something once, we will be able to do it again, just like riding a bike. Just because you don't remember your past lives doesn't mean they didn't happen. Can you remember being in your mother's womb or being born? Can you remember waking up for the first time or suckling at your mother's breast? Some people can remember. This information exists deep inside your own mind. There are innumerable cases of people remembering their past lives. There was a series on History Channel called The Ghost in My Child, which documented 2 utterly compelling cases per episode of children who remembered a past life and could name names and places that they could not possibly have known from their experiences in their present life. Google past lives and you will find thousands of cases that cannot be explained in any other way. Science could easily prove the existence of past lives, but Christianity. The Master Matrachekta Garland of Birth Stories says, I quote, "The one just born, its mind without strength, with senses dull, seeks breasts to suck and food to eat, untaught by anyone, is clearly due to being used to these things in other lives." Unquote. The Romans deleted every obvious trace of reincarnation from the Bible. The idea that somebody they executed would have another life was anathema to their power and ability to terrorize. However, there are still a few dim echoes left in the scriptures that the Romans overlooked. The most obvious was the statement by Peter that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah, which was affirmed by Jesus. It's in your Bible, have a look. There were also several vague references to who Yeshua was before. No definitive answers survived, but the question remained. There is also Jesus' enigmatic statement, I quote, "Before Abraham, I am," unquote. Reincarnation is in itself a complex issue, but some form of rebirth is an accepted reality in all Eastern religious traditions. In Tibet, the title Rinpoche signifies a reborn master whose spiritual lineage is known. Such people are referred to as Tolkus. Tenzin Gyatso, otherwise known as the Dalai Lama, is the 14th incarnation of a recognized spiritual master. He was subjected to rigorous testing before he was accepted as authentic. He was presented with a number of ritual implements, only some of which belong to the 13th Dalai Lama, bowls, robes, and rosary beads, and he correctly recognized each one. He also remembered the name of one of the older monks, an associate of his previous incarnation. To Tibetan Buddhists, rebirth is a precise science, and they describe the 4 bardos in great detail: the bardo of life, the bardo of death, the bardo of the afterlife, and the bardo of becoming. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is a spiritual guidebook specifically written to help people navigate through the afterlife and achieve a favorable rebirth. The Buddha said we should test his teachings, and if they fail our tests, he advised us to discard them. Or, if we find something better, use it instead. This is the opposite of faith. This is the wisdom of an ethical teacher who acknowledges that your mind is as valid as his, and if his teaching doesn't help you, then you should find something else that does. This is wisdom that will pass every test because it obliterates ignorance. Wisdom is more than just an accumulation of knowledge. It's a state of spiritual connection which manifests as wise actions and speech. Wisdom and common sense are mutually exclusive. Wisdom is not merely a more advanced form of common sense. It is something else entirely, the result of the realization of the true nature of mind. Genius is extreme common sense and is not generally the result of spiritual connection. Geniuses like Tesla and Einstein demonstrated a spiritual connection which they were able to manifest in our world for the good of humanity. However, a lot of geniuses are extremely selfish, a prime example being the supremely egotistical Elon Musk. Ego and selfishness are a block to spiritual realization, and no amount of common sense will alleviate this ignorance. Common sense enables a person to live successfully in this world, but wisdom is the cure for the worldly condition. Wisdom is what gets you into the kingdom of heaven. It's the result of becoming conscious beyond the surface level of mind and is the natural consequence of discovering the divine source that resides deep inside all of us. If somebody punches you in the face, common sense tells you that you have two options: fight or flight. Either punch them back or run for it and live to fight another day. Yeshua said no. Turn the other cheek and let them punch you again if that's the best they've got. This is the opposite of common sense and could get you killed if you've been acting inappropriately up to that point. However, if your behavior has been impeccably virtuous, turning the other cheek is a gesture of fearlessness. It requires great courage and restraint, as well as a complete disregard for worldly consequences. It represents a total negation of self-interest and cannot result in the creation of bad karma. Or, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama far more eloquently explains, I quote, "Anger cannot be overcome by anger. If a person shows anger to you and you show anger, the result is disastrous. In contrast, if you control anger and show opposite attitudes, compassion, tolerance, and patience, then not only do you yourself remain in peace, but the other's anger will gradually diminish." Unquote. This is wisdom. The Jews never accepted Yeshua as their Messiah. To them, even though he was Jewish, he was an outsider. They considered his wisdom a threat to their ancient beliefs. Love thy enemies is an expression of the Buddhist concept of non-selfhood. It emphasizes the negation of self in favor of others, even people who want to harm you. It is not what Christianity proclaims. They say that God, the ultimate ego in the sky, will not turn the other cheek if you do wrong by him. He will punish you for eternity unless you confess, tell a man in a dress, and atone, do what the man in the dress tells you to do. This usually involves a lot of groveling and fearfulness. They may have co-opted some of Yeshua's words, but they do not understand nor practice them. Their doctrine is a schizophrenic patchwork of inconsistent ignorance cobbled together for crowd control. That's why they demand unquestioning belief. That's why it's not your behavior that gets you into their heaven, it's your faith. As long as you believe and go to church and tell God you're sorry and give them money, you can do whatever you like. That's neither wisdom nor common sense. It's amazing that the Romans allowed a statement like, "The meek shall inherit the earth," to remain in the Bible. They probably thought it was so ridiculous that nobody would take it seriously. "Love thy enemy" probably had them rolling on the floor with laughter. Both Yeshua and the Buddha renounced all of their possessions and embarked on their ministries with little more than the clothes on their backs. The Buddha walked out of a palace where he was a prince with servants to fulfill his every wish. Common sense tells us that this is an ultimate state of existence which people spend their entire lives trying to attain. In saying 54 from the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua stated, I quote, "Blessed are those who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven," unquote. Wisdom regards luxury and possessions as impediments to spiritual development. A true master does not require any of these things and does not waste his or her time attempting to acquire them. Should they come to him or her, he or she gives them away expecting nothing in return. For him or her, they have no intrinsic value. In saying 63, Yeshua stated, I quote, "There was a rich man who had much money. He said, I'll use my money to sow, reap, plant, and fill my barns with fruit, so that I won't need anything." That's what he was thinking to himself, but he died that very night. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear, unquote. In the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua promulgates the kingdom of heaven not as a final destination, but as a state of self-discovery. In saying 3, Yeshua states, I quote, "If those who lead you say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fishes will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you and outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father. But if you do not come to know yourselves, then you exist in poverty, and you are poverty," unquote. The kingdom symbolizes a state of transformed consciousness where wisdom arises naturally. This topic is dealt with comprehensively in Appendix 3, Heaven and Hell. God is not out there pulling invisible strings making reality real, because it isn't. In saying 56, Yeshua stated, I quote, "Whoever has known the world has found a corpse. Whoever has found a corpse, of them the world isn't worthy," unquote. Wisdom tells us that the divine is inside you, patiently waiting for you to discover it. It is what you really are, your essence, and has always been there and always will be. But unless you realize this, you will not be. This whole nonsense of a separated external God is why we are lonely, depressed, and why we go mad. We fail to make our inner connection. If we pray at all, we pray to God out there and hope that He can somehow help us out there because we aren't in here where we belong. Yeshua states in the Gospel of Philip, I quote, "Bridegrooms and brides belong to the bridal chamber. No one can see a bridegroom or a bride except by becoming one," unquote. Selfish people can often appear to be very intelligent. They can even be geniuses. This is because their thinking is not cluttered with considerations of the rights, feelings, and needs of others. They have a very simple equation which they apply to every issue in their lives. Their equation is to always do what benefits and works for them the most. This is usually fairly obvious and doesn't require a vast amount of intellectual processing power. They don't have to factor in the impact their selfishness will have on anyone else. Selfishness is easy. It can be considered a primary form of common sense. The American actor Jeff Daniels summed it up by saying, I quote, "Hate is easy, love is hard," unquote. Unselfish people are far more complex and their decision-making is nowhere near as straightforward. Often their self-interest doesn't even enter into their equation, except possibly to consider the positive effects they can have on others. Unselfishness is not easy. It requires wisdom. It doesn't always justify the end result in such obvious ways. Many selfish people think unselfish people are stupid. Putting somebody else first is counterintuitive. However, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, and I quote, "If you try to subdue your selfish motives, anger and so forth, and develop more kindness and compassion for others, ultimately you yourself will benefit more than you would otherwise. So sometimes I say that the wise selfish person should practice this way. Foolish selfish people are always thinking of themselves and the result is negative. Wise, selfish people think of others, help others as much as they can, and the result is that they too receive benefit." Unquote. Foolish, selfish people tell lies. They see an opportunity to take somebody else's possessions as just that, an opportunity which they can exploit. Some really foolish, selfish people are murderers. They value their self-interest above somebody else's life. For these reasons, selfish people often appear to have a natural advantage in today's competitive dog-eat-dog world. They are far more ruthless and can more easily focus on the results that will give them the greatest advantage, the most profits, and the most success. Foolish people rule our world. They control most of the resources and thrive in most political situations where self-interest is a major motivator. Humanity is drowning in selfishness. Other less selfish people envy and admire the foolishly selfish. They see them as role models and try to emulate their disgusting behavior. This must stop. Selfish people are not just unwise, they are sick. They are mentally deficient, lacking empathy, compassion, and kindness. They are cancer cells. They literally suck. Yeshua was not selfish. His message is not selfish. All the selfishness enshrined in the Bible came from the Romans, who were supremely selfish. Their religion and their church will eventually die. I hope this book contributes to eliminating them so that Yeshua's timeless wisdom can be rediscovered, revealed, and thrive. In the 21st century, we need a new way to react to what we call reality, and the 2,000-year-old wisdom of Yeshua is a great place to start this modern revolution. If you are a Christian and you claim to love Jesus, then read his actual words in the Gospels of Philip and Thomas. Some of his words made it into the Bible, but the rest of it is aspiritual. What you have accepted is the Romans' corrupt misrepresentation of Yeshua's sacred message, and their book does not give you his complete message. Their church does not represent wisdom. They just used Yeshua to further their worldly selfishness. They know the Elohim are not God, see Appendix 1. They know they are a fraud. They know they are a sanctuary and refuge for pedophiles. But they desperately don't want you to know any of that. They don't want you to know anything. They want you to believe in a miracle-infested fairy tale. They want you to be too terrified to question any of the ignorance they've been claiming is absolute truth that will grant salvation for over 1,500 years. The greatest news and the Romans' biggest lie is that Yeshua was a man. He wasn't God or anything other than what we are. The only thing that distinguished him from us was his wisdom. He had become the divine within his own being. That is the lesson they stole from us when they stole him, when they made him into other. He was never other. He was always one of us and should have served as an example of what we can all become. To quote Alan Watts, "They kicked him upstairs so he wouldn't be able to influence anybody else." Unquote. We need to bring him back down here where he always belonged and to accept him as the great spiritual master that he really was, both for ourselves and for him. We need to bring his wisdom home.